Okay, great. Somebody nowadays the new thing which is coming up is forensic audits. And what is the need of valuation in forensic audit? That is the question. And these are all collected questions going to be bombarded on you people. Yes, Sanjay sir, over to you.
Yeah, okay. So basically what you have mentioned is that how forensic or forensic accounting and the valuations are related. And in the current scenario where a lot of issues are there with the company, IBC is the place. So how this forensic accounting, forensic audit plays in the valuation. Now, business valuation is the process of determining the economic value of a business. There are generally three acceptable valuation approach: asset, income, and market approach. Each has its own peculiarity, each has its own process and way. Don't get into that. But regardless of the approach is used, the financial records of the business are significant. But what happens when those numbers are incorrect or misleading? So, or more importantly, how can you verify whether the numbers are reliable? So, there is a case of forensic accounting comes into picture. And in this forensic account, we get into the normalization adjustment. So I just briefly touch upon how the forensic accounting is. So for the knowledge of the audience, forensic accounting is the investigation into the accounting records to determine the accuracy of these. Okay. And it has been commonly defined as the application of investigative and analytical skills for the purpose of resolving financial issues in a manner that meets standard of the court of law. Now, forensic accounts in number of business valuation. Hello, hello. Yeah. Forensic accounting in number of business valuation cases uh, where somewhere it is required, somewhere it is not required. This is because it's not just the numbers, but the numbers that count in your valuation. So when we as a valuer has to be more careful, and especially in the scenario where you are assigned with the finding out the accuracy of the valuation you are proposing, or the share valuation or business takeover. That becomes a lot of importance of forensic accounting. Okay. Now, forensic accounting generally is a process to identify, explain, contradict, and verify the financials data presented when valuing the business. Now, when we do this, so normalization adjustments uh, come into the picture. When we get a financial statement, a normalization adjustments may be applied to the financial statements of a company being valued. Now, what are the normal common adjustments from the experience is generally the discretionary expenses, what you see, like excess owners compensation or wages for family who do not actually work for the company, personal expenses such as travel and vacations, or buying a diamond ring for the girlfriend has been debited to the company. So all these expenses which generally comes and it plays a havoc on your valuation. For example, in one of our cases where standard financial due diligence and research was carried out, and it was a shareholder litigation matter where the valuer has to keep in. So all such questions comes up where almost a valuation goes down by 50%. So forensic and valuation goes by the by. In the current scenario, when you are doing valuation of an IBC company where it has gone into insolvency. So as a personal experience, I have done that, and where you see a lot of puff expenses. Puff means PUFE, preferential, undervalued, fraudulent, and extortionate expenses. So all these things comes into play into forensic, and it helps the evaluation of the company. So when a valuation is finally presented by RP to the for settlement, the company's value has substantially eroded, and this is where the forensic and valuation plays a joint role. This is my submission. Any questions? We
Yeah,
can't hear you, Mr.
question
Bhavin.
on this. Just I'm Pankaj from this side. The forensic audit which you have mentioned, and that has to be mostly done with the historicals, whereas valuation when we do, that has to be more with to do with the projections or
Yeah.
the business plan which
Mm.
management is doing. So how both are connected, and secondly, how we are going to do, like if business is doing some projection and planning, then how the forensic audit will play a role in terms of uh, make.
Hello. Hello.
Right,
Hello, Mr.
Bhavesh, your audio is not audible at all.
Hello.
Hello, Bhavesh sir, your audio is not working, sir.
Guys, can you continue with the questions? I think there is some
Yes, sir,
problem
I'll
in Bhavesh
continue
side.
with the question. Next question.
Yeah, can I?
Just a minute.
Hmm.
Bhavesh sir, you are not audible. Guys, I suggest you continue with other
Hello.
questions.
Yes, sir. The next question is for Harshad, sir.
So there are ample of opportunities. Basically, this as of now, this you can take this limited examination, which is open to CMA and CS, and as well as the big opportunity lies with this the people who are graduates. So I have seen so many. In fact, Bhavesh sir, I have shared some of the stories wherein somebody who has just graduated with relevant experience or a postgraduate with relevant experience, he also can become the valuer. So and the new code, that is new values rules, is being coming. So it again gives some opportunities for newcomers who can take this career as a standalone registered valuer. So there are ample of opportunities. In fact, this new registered valuer bill is going to consolidate the framework of the valuation across the various legislatures across the India. So you will see that the valuations currently, which are predominantly in the Companies Act and IBC and maybe FEMA, these are going to be these are the right now the main opportunities where we are doing valuations. But going forward, all the SEBI laws, all the income tax, and there are so many laws wherein the valuation is required. This all framework is going to be consolidated, and this opportunity would be there for the all the registered valuers. And mind you that this qualification is open. It takes all the professional bodies equivalent. So all CS, CMAs, even the graduates, postgraduates, MBAs, they should think about pursuing this course and become the registered valuer. The key is that you should be becoming a registered valuer as early as possible. So I was just checking the number of the registered valuer. So as of now, only 3,232 registered valuers are there. So you just look at the population of or the requirement of valuation in the India, and only there are 3,232 people who are there, who are taking this opportunity. And of course, there is the report also says that there is a huge requirement for the valuers. So all those who are not CAs, of course, has to think about doing this course as a very good career opportunity.
Harshit sir, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Mr. Bhavesh. we can
Yes,
hear
sir.
I think, Harshit sir, whatever you said, that is the number of valuers are 3,000, but out of which, how many are SFA valuers?
you. Yeah.
Sir, I was just checking the number. Precisely, it is 1181.
1181,
1181.
yeah. Right.
Less
So
than
in your
1,200.
gut feel, ठीक है, 1200, let's say, how many are required according to you, SFA valuers?
Sir, you look at the market. For example, say number of active companies in India. So there are around, I am told that there are around 11 lakh. So out of that 11 lakh company, let us discount for non-active companies. So if I say that, okay, there are around say 5 lakhs to 6 lakhs number of companies. So company will have, suppose 5 lakhs we take as a ballpark number for active companies. And out of that, suppose there is an allotment of shares on preferential basis. So in assuming that they do allotment, once in a 3 years. So you will see that perhaps 5 lakhs divided by 2 or for that matter 6 lakhs divided by 2. So you will see that maybe even conservatively you take 3 lakhs as a company. So you will see that perhaps 1 lakh amount of returns has to be generated, isn't it? And that is only pertaining to one section in the Companies Act. So we are talking about there are around 15 sections wherein this in the Companies Act there is a requirement of valuers. In FEMA, every this FCGPR forms and all this all
Alright,
having this kind of requirement.
sorry to interrupt you. Just to quickly catch up. So what is the number you feel SFA values should be?
I think it should be around 50,000
Required by
because that's what
country.
the report also says.
Huh? Sorry?
It should be around 50,000 minimum.
50,000. Okay, Chandar, what do you say? Just give a figure.
Sir, 5,000 to 10,000 maximum.
We need 5 to 10,000.
5,000 looks
Alright.
reasonable.
5,000 looks reasonable. I'm asking about required one. Nikki, what is your judgment? 50,000, 5,000, what do you say? Nikki,
I think I go with Chandar. 5,000-7,000 तो होना चाहिए.
they are enough. नहीं होना चाहिए नहीं चाहिए कितने? मिनिमम कितने चाहिए?
5 तो दे दो पहले.
संजय?
Yeah,
Sanjay, figure
yeah.
बोलो.
Yeah, with the current
Figure बोलो,
scope
figure.
of work, with the current scope of work,
नहीं,
4
नहीं,
to
figure
5,000. Hello, 4,000 to 5,000.
5,000.
Yeah.
All right. And Anand?
Yes, sir. I am
Quick.
also of the same opinion.
5,000. And
Yeah.
GKR, sir, your expert view, unmute yourself. GKR, sir, unmute and tell us the figure, golden figure from your mouth.
2 lakhs.
2 lakhs. Okay. So 4 panelists say we need 5,000 around. 1 panelist say 50,000. And GKR, sir, is saying 2 lakhs. Okay.
This
So I
number,
think it appears to be
this,
told by
sir,
South
I'll
India.
make this point.
Okay. I think all of us should shift to Chennai. Then only we'll get a
That-
judgment why 2 lakhs. But I'll come
That
later.
shows-
I'll come to later to that.
Bhavesh, that shows how
subscribe to-
diverse panelists is what you have selected. That shows the diversity of all the panelists.
That
Number
is
one more point
true.
is that
But India is full of valuable means we all should shift to Chennai. That is very clear. GKR, sir, I am buying a house in Chennai. Okay. Anyway, let's move to Chandar. Chandar, the next question.
No,
is
I
to you.
have a question.
What
I have a
are the
question
key
to
issues?
GKR, sir.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come to that later. Because these figures can be debated lifelong here. We'll keep a separate section for that. So what are the key issues in market-based valuation? Chandar, it's yours.
Yeah. Yeah,
What
sir,
are the key issues in market-based valuation?
Yeah, sir, market-based valuation, which we also call as a relative valuation. In fact, it is very important that first, before doing valuation, we need to understand the purpose of valuation. And market-based valuation is when we compare a valuation of a company vis-a-vis the valuation of its comparable companies. Because I'm presuming that the company is an unlisted company which we have to value. So we are comparing it relatively to the other comparable listed companies. So the first question that comes to my mind is, what should be the comparable companies? Because I have seen that people accept the comparable companies by their convenience. Like, for example, there is an IT company. So can you say that IT for valuation of a small IT company, Infosys or TCS, is my comparable, who are market leaders? So one way is that you should select the entire industry, and out of the industry, you should consider the median multiple of those industry rather than taking an average multiple. And because median removes the outliers. If you average out, then your number comes very, very different. Second part is that which multiple you should take. Like, for example, if you take a EV/EBITDA multiple, it gives you an enterprise valuation. If you take a P multiple, it gives you a equity valuation. So if you are using a EV/EBITDA multiple, which gives you an enterprise valuation, you need to do adjustments for your debt and cash to arrive at an equity valuation. So you should know which multiple leads to equity valuation, which multiple leads to enterprise valuation. Another part is, sometimes you could be doing valuation for employee stock options, which are minority in nature. At the same time, you could be doing valuation for a controlling stake transaction. So when you do a trading multiples approach, you consider the listed companies, and that in turn is a minority valuation. Whereas in market approach, there is also another methodology, which is comparable transaction methodology. So we are not looking at the market listed companies, we are looking at the private companies wherein the investments have taken place. So you should also know whether you are doing a minority valuation or you are doing a control valuation. Then again, in a market approach, I mean, because the companies which are listed in public domain, they have adequate float and liquidity. But when you value your unlisted company, you need to apply some discount, which we call technically DLOM, discount for lack of marketability. So these are the issues, and specifically under COVID, like for financial reporting, if you look at the valuation date is 31st of March. So one debate which is going on these days is that when you are valuing on 31st of March, and if you take the market multiple of 31st of March, is it fair? Because you have to arrive at a fair valuation. And on 31st of March, market was highly volatile. In fact, the market fell by more than 40% within 20 days of March. So 31st of March to me is an outlier date. And if you have to value on 31st of March, rather than taking a valuation multiple of 31st of March, you should consider taking an average of say 2 months or 3 months period to normalize that. Like my fellow panelist, Mr. Shah, said that you have to normalize the financials, because if you have to now, you just answer that the multiple, the EBITDA which you are taking or the profit you are taking, can you say that is normalized in COVID time? It is a big debatable question. At the same time, the market price which you are taking and considering, it is not a fair price. So our objective of valuation is to derive a stable fair value. It is not a forced sale value. It is a value between a willing buyer and a willing seller. So we need to normalize not only the financials, but also the valuation multiples by considering past averages, and consider whether the valuation is for a minority stake transaction, controlling stake transaction, and then appropriate adjustments needs to be done.
Great. I quickly move on to Anand. In venture capital funding, the value is already determined by the venture capitalist, and the value appears to be much higher side. Okay, for example, for a face value of 10, the values are 600, 2000, 4000. What should be done in such a case? And they are taking the stake in the company, they are going for compulsorily convertible preference shares, equity shares, and how to arrive at this value, especially of preference shares. That's where you have to please throw the light.
Sir, first of all, I would like.
Anandji?
Yeah, I'm clear on the question, but based upon my limited knowledge, I can throw the light first of all on the cost of preference shares. So as far as cost of preference share is concerned, it is less riskier than the equity shares. Participated equity valuation. So we need consider cost of preference share, considering the dividend and other things. We can we can give a reduction of reduction in the risk premium has to be reduced from the cost of equity to arrive at a cost of preference shares. This is what I feel on the cost of preference shares to be valued.
Right.
And
Nikki, would you like to add something? Nikki, would you like to add something to more than what he has said?
Yeah, sure.
Just tell the additional points.
Yeah, sure. So what we understand is
Don't
that
take point he has covered.
sure. So what they say is they are valuing a compulsorily convertible preference share. So what I understand is that the compulsory convertible option, that is which is attached to the preference shares, gives it a different nature, which needs to be adjusted at this point of time. And here in this case, the compulsory convertible preference shares, what we need to do is understand from the company what is the time period within which it goes, they are expecting it to convert into equity capital. Till that period, we need to consider it as preference shares, and later on the equity value. So a combination needs to be done such that to arrive at the CCPS valuation.
All right. I think I will have to go for now, requesting each panel member to restrict themselves to 3 to 5 sentences and be brief to answer because we have a lot to cover and we are of course behind the schedule. Thanks to the audience who has given a lot of questions. I move to Sanjay. What are the probable adjustments required in valuation because of COVID? Sanjay, please, 5 sentences maximum. I'm to this
5 sentences, basically, okay. So I'll give you why essential recommendation on impact of
more than 10 words.
Okay, fine. So basically increase the frequency of evaluation and then assess the going concern status of the company and understand the counterparty risk. Current uncertainty always has led to a lot of liquidity issues, so you check on that. Consider company specific premiums and the liquidity risk in your discount rate. Greater market volatility in high levels of uncertainty in the recent past may mean higher betas and debt market. It is, however, too early to assess the long-term impact, but do consider discounting means higher beta. Consider scenarios adjusted based on market evidences in your business plans and financial metrics by integrating what is known as knowable at the valuation date. And lastly, widen the range of evaluations and monitor your assumptions regularly. The ranges themselves may be subject to volatility at regular valuation you are performing. We rely on projections that are subject to constant change. So robust documentation procedures will be required to mitigate this COVID impact for the valuation. And I suggest for all the fellow colleagues and for the valuation, it is important that your documentation should be strong and your assumptions should be based on the valuation what is impacted. Thank you.
Great, Sanjay sir. Now we move on a very interesting topic of valuation of intangible assets. And we are with GKR sir, I suppose I can short form and say. Yes, GKR sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. And all my panelists, Sanjay, Harshad, Chandar, Nikki, Anand, and 139 participants across length and breadth of the country. I'll only make 3 points with respect to intangible assets. There is a research report, all of you can download and read it. That research report is called as GIFT. It is called Global Intangible Financial Report, which every year the institute publishes. The organization which publishes this report is Brand Finance, number 1. Number 2, as per this research report, the total enterprise value consists of 2/3 intangible assets and 1/3 is tangible assets. And out of this 2/3 intangible assets, 1/2, that is 1/3 of the total enterprise value is disclosed intangible assets, and another 1/3 of the total enterprise value is undisclosed intangible assets, and which is what is paid as the market premium to book value. So there is a huge scope which is available with respect to valuation of intangible assets. Number 1, 2. Today we have 3 asset class. Number 1, land and building. 2 plant and machinery, 3 securities or financial assets. The time is not far off where we'll have a 4th asset class called intangible assets. Over to the organizer, the Limca record holder, triplet CA Ram Mohan Bhave. I am only a Limca bottle holder. Ji. Okay, I am very happy to actually Limca record holder. Over to next question.
I only want to ask one more repetition of the line which you are talking about GIFT, because the audience is asking some questions. Can you tell us the spelling or a little more? I can see here some link brand finance.
The Global Intangible Finance Tracker. Global Intangible Finance Tracker. Already Mr. K. Kaushik Raj has given the link in the chat.
Okay. So those were participants, including me, who need to add knowledge. Better take a photo of that. In 2 different ways of handling funds infused in calculating pre-money valuation. First, reduce the funds infused from NPV to arrive at pre-money. And the second approach is to do not consider the funds infusion. Divide NPV by number of shares to arrive at per share value. Which approach is correct?
I prefer first because projections are possible due to capital infusion, hence value arrived at. Then we have to subtract the funds infused to arrive at pre-money valuation, then divide the additional. Alternatively, we can do projections assuming that capacity to infuse funds and have debt funds infused. So number of equities do not make difference. So one can calculate FCFF, reduce debt and arrive at FCFE also. So generally in this question, I prefer first valuation, assuming that the promoters have the capacity to infuse funds. If they don't have the infused funds, then they can get the debt funds and also get a projections.
Please guide on safeguards provided by disclaimers in the valuation reports.
Sir, this is a very interesting question. I'll only have 3 points to make. Point number 1, in the draft valuers bill, there is a very clear-cut point which has been brought out. While the committee of experts recognize the need for valuers to provide reasonable disclaimer, valuation report shall not carry a disclaimer which has the potential to dilute the responsibility of valuer. So point to be noted, valuation report is not an audit report. Valuation report is not an internal audit report. It is not otherwise. As chartered accountants, we are very fond of giving disclaimers, but valuation report is not so, because of only one reason, that the valuation report should be capable of being tested through the crucible of legal evidence in judicial proceedings. But there is one very interesting point also I want to mention, that one of the panelists in the one of the committee of experts, he has come out with a sample of disclaimers which is given in the annexure T of the draft valuers bill. That alone, they are mentioning one more point, that the respect to RVOs, we have 14 RVOs, they have to come out with reasoning how the valuers, they have to bring a disclaimer in their valuation report. So as of today, my view is, my humble view is, no disclaimer in a valuation report is the best safeguard. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3, even in the draft valuers bill, at the end, there is a peculiar section called section 53, where they have made it very clear that nowhere the valuer should be or given the mandate to give a disclaimer in their valuation report. Second, even the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India's ICA RVO valuation standard, which they have adopted, they have also given in their valuation standard very clearly that the disclaimer has to be avoided. But nevertheless, there is one small scope is there, which in International Valuation Standard 104, at the end, if you look at it, there is a scope for giving assumptions and special assumptions. So the circumstances may force us to actually take some assumptions and special assumptions. In that cover, we can actually bring that, but not as a disclaimer, but as a assumption and special assumption. So this is my humble view. Over to our Limca record holder.
I think you can call me Mohan because this otherwise I'll have to drink Limca every day. All right. So I think a very interesting point, and this point alone can have long discussions, but I do not know. We will keep this point for discussion at the end if at all required. Because there are thousands of doubts on this. In fact, disclaimer itself requires one separate session, like illegal due diligence has been done or based on management reputation, all those things. What will happen to those when there is no disclaimers? And have the values have really started putting no disclaimers now is a question mark. Similarly, assumption and spatial assumption, are they the escape route to go for the disclaimers? I really don't know. But this question is I move to my friend Harshad now. How to value the assets which have niche market?
Typically, this problems comes in niche. There is a question of marketability. So technically, the assets. For example, I have gone through a case where there are paintings. Now, what happens that suppose this paintings is to be valued. So this kind of things, the main there is no market value. This market approach doesn't work. So the only way out is that you have to go by this income approach, or you have to project what could be the potential string of incomes that you can accumulate based on that assets. So that is the only approach, because the cost approach also doesn't work, because that cost may or may not, or the asset may not reflect the right value. So the only way out is to find out the income, or to find out the projected income, and based on that you can capitalize and you can get to certain value. That's what could be the answer to this.
All right, we move to Chandarji. Somebody has asked for a brief on fair value, index 113, but the request is the basics are known, like level 1, level 2, level 3, market income, asset model, quoted, observable, unobservable. These 9 words are known. You can go beyond it.
So essentially, in a financial reporting, the only point I would like to make here is that, level 1, level 2, at the time of COVID, like I mentioned before, the market comparable method may not give a realistic valuation. And in fact, there could be significant large difference which can be observed between a market comparable method and a DCF method. So, the valuer would need to consider whether can he balance out the two by taking like average of 2-3 months multiples, or maybe the market multiple may need to be ignored. That is one point I would like to make.
Good. I think, any particular practical example you would like to give on this? Very quickly, sorry. Because out of 1500, maybe one case you can disclose.
No, so basically, sir, what is happening that you can take any company, the valuation multiple you take in January and you take on 31st of March. Most logically, if you exclude a few sectors like pharma sectors, telecom sectors, you will see that the multiple would have diminished by about 40-50%. So here the challenge is, if you take the valuation date at 30th of June or even today, the market has come back. But the limited discussion is because financial reporting is required, impairment testing is required at year-end basis. So any company is going to be, in practice, we did a lot of valuation this year for impairment. And there was always debate with the auditors, whether you should consider that, you should not consider, whether you should average, whether you should ignore. So a valuer need to present and make a case accordingly, because 31st March to me looks like an abnormal date. And just to collaborate that, sir, there is volatility index, which is, if you go to BSE, you can find VIX, volatility index. The normal volatility index is in the range of 25 to 30. but on 31st of March, the volatility index was 8080. That shows how high level of volatility was there, because Nifty fell down 40% in about 17 trading sessions. So it was so steep decline that in fact, when you are valuing smaller companies declined by as much as 60%. You can't say that my company has declined 60%, because that is a temporary event. It is not a permanent event. So you need to segregate that here we are not doing trading. We are considering what is the worth of a company. And so there is a need of normalization. Over to you.
All right, I think very clearly explained. Now, this question actually, the next question for Mr. Anand actually. Anand, your screen has become ulta. Now that's correct. So last time this question was discussed, that is workers and scorecard model, are they permitted under valuation standards? And if yes, do they fall under income model, asset model, or market model? So you may like to quickly summarize.
So I would like to throw some light on IBS 105 basis and methods, as well as IBS 102 on the implementation, para 6, which speaks about the commentaries to the assets, wherein Burkus method and scorecard method are generally accepted methods, and accordingly we can confirm that these are the methods which are inconsistent with the IBS.
Okay,
Can I just,
Sanjay, you would like to add?
yeah, see, what I observe is this: as per ICAI Valuation Standard 102, para 52, suggests that use of method in combination with income approach, where the asset not yet started generating income, or there is a significant uncertainty on the amount and timing of income, future cash flows, that is typically for the startup companies, or the client does not have an access to information relating to the asset being valued. Example, minority shareholders may not have access to projection budgets. So in that case, generally, one can use this Burkus method scorecard method, but it has to be in combination with any of the approaches, basically. And I personally use Burkus method as a supplementary method to generally validate the DCF method, giving reasonable reserve regarding startup valuation within 4-5 crore rupees, not major.
Okay, one straight question somebody has asked in this: is Burkus word there in international valuation standard? The word directly is there or not? Sanjay?
No, it is not.
No, it is not.
Not any valuation standard, it has not given anything.
Okay. So that creates the air of doubt whether that is allowed or not.
Yeah, Mr. Chandar can suggest something.
Sir, valuation standards only give us the principles.
Yeah.
Valuation standards do not give us the methods, because there are only 3 approaches: income, asset, and market. And scorecard and Burkus method are an extension of the existing valuation. Like you value a company, you value a startup company through DCF method and arrive at 100 crore valuation. What scorecard method does is that it also looks into the qualitative factors, like what is the management quality, what is the traction size, what is the size of the opportunity, and then it combines the quantitative and qualitative factors. So basically it is one more level of rationing, because it's a startup scenario. You cannot, I mean, you value it under a success scenario, survival scenario, and failure scenario, and then average it out. So I think the question that whether it is permitted, valuation standards do not permit, or valuation standards give you principle, and any valuation method can be adopted. In practice, we apply it for startup case or where there is high level of uncertainty.
This discussion can be longer, so I avoid. In fact, I attended one valuation seminar recently, where one of the speakers was strongly propagating that income, asset, and market method, none of them properly cover the qualitative aspects. So there is a need for a 4th method. But we'll leave it at that. because we will get that speaker also someday. I now move to Nikki madam again, because if you come to Mumbai and when this question was asked, saying, I read a question, explain the nuances of startup valuation. And as far as I know, we call Nikki as at least in Mumbai as a startup valuation queen. So when this question we saw, we said this has to go to Nikki only. Yeah, Nikki, over to you.
As GK sir is saying, listening the words of Queen from Limca record is really a privilege. So thank you so much. But very humbly and quickly to put it up. So nuances in case of a startup valuation.
Mic has a problem, Nikki. We can't hear you.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Now you're audible.
I'm sorry. We have a lot of rain, so I had a little bit of network issue. Anyways, what I was trying to say quickly was that in startup, the most important factor would be understanding the stage at which the company is, whether it is at an ideation stage or it has already listed its product and it is at a prototype stage or a minimum viable product. So understanding at which the stage is, that is the most important thing in case of a startup valuation. And to just quickly wrap it up, I would say that the best thing for a startup would be to consider more than one method. Have a multiple methods that you use it. Use DCF, use VCF, venture capital funding method. Try to bring an average of it when you are doing the valuation, and understanding the company, product, and the stage would be the most important thing. Thank you so much.
I will add one question which is asked by one of the participants here, and this is to Nikki only, that in the pre-money stage, the DCF calculation is difficult. But if at all you are calculating by using DCF method in the pre-money stage, like in the, let's say the first day OYO was started, or first year when OYO or Ola or such new business models were started, still do you are saying that DCF should be calculated?
See, why we are using DCF is to understand the potential that the company will be able to reach using the projection. Obviously, using the money. Obviously, the level of importance that you would give to the DCF would be less, because whatever they are putting into numbers is still numbers. Because as you were mentioning, and which I remember rightly, that Bhavesh sir had himself shared his experience of valuing OYO. No, I'm sorry, the car company,
Ola,
right,
Ola,
sir?
Ola.
Ola. So the stage at which maybe the company has not yet reached the market potential, not yet launched the product. So whatever the cash flow they are protecting, they are still just the numbers. And hence they cannot be given too much of importance. But yes, definitely knowing at what value they would be reaching, DCF should be considered.
Okay. Now, beyond this, we want one very objective and a single figure answer from you, that in any startup valuation, since the value is to be calculated and that DCF can get emerged over far more number of years. It may not be 3 to 5 years. It can be 10 years, 20 years. So in your experience, for DCF calculation of a startup, what is the maximum number of years projection you have done?
So what we have
Just
done
give
is,
us the figure.
yes, what we have done is, one of the cases we have done H model. So we did the projection for 7 years, and then post that for another, we used the H model 5 years, and then terminal value was applied beyond that period. So that was considerably giving the startup a time period of around 10 to 13, 15 years to set up the market. So that is what we had done it in one of the cases.
Okay.
Great. Now we move to Sanjay sir.
Yeah.
IBBR registered valuer. Will he talk about wealth valuation?
No. Wealth valuation is a separate chapter in the wealth tax, in the income tax rule 57. They said that wealth tax registered under section 34 AB of the Income Tax Act, and there is a separate rule as per wealth tax 1957. So there is a separate qualification, separate monitoring agency like Income Tax Commissioner keeps the record of the wealth tax register, means valuer, and for IBBI register, it's a separate IBBI keeps the record. Is different than the registered valuer. Income tax valuation is not coming in the first place. We can look at the valuers bring that.
On the draft valuer bill, there are some 11 or 12 laws going to be amended. Is the wealth tax also among that?
Wealth tax, it is forming part of the Income Tax Act only. So within that, I think the Wealth Tax Act also will come into along with that act to be part as part of the National Institute of Valuers draft bill.
Okay. Now we move to Gopal Krishnan sir. GKR sir, your question asked is how to do e-commerce valuations. I mean, this is a big bogey.
Very interesting. Very interesting question. I'll only give 3 points. Number one, there is a average study. There is a study that was made that e-commerce sites valuation on an average right from 2010 to 2019 till last year, especially last year, the e-commerce site valuations have gone for maximum 3.1x. What is this multiple? This is an average multiple. This is a turnover multiple. This based on the turnover, 3 times will be the valuation of that e-commerce site. Number one. Maximum deals are only small deals. What do you call it as? Small e-commerce sites. Number two. Number three, there are places, what do you call it as, hubs, where people come and bid, and the buyer also, they get data from there, and that is also a platform. I'll just share with you 3 platforms like that. Flippa.com, FLIPPA.com. 2, digitalexits.com, DIGITALEXITS.com. Number 3, businessexits.com, BUSINESSEXITS.com. Third point, how long it takes to actually convert the e-commerce deal and close the deal. They say 50% of the e-commerce deal was closed within 3 months time, within 90 days. And maybe another 30% deal they were able to close on the 4th and 5th month. That is maximum by 120 days they were able to do it by 4 months time. And the remaining 20% deal they were able to close within 6 months time. That's the maximum. So this is in brief about the e-commerce valuation. Thank you very much. Over to CA Bave.
Yeah. Now, Jigar sir, only one question remains. 50, 30, 20 is all the successful deals. But what could be a percentage of failed deals?
Sir, I didn't get your question.
Sorry, I'll repeat. When the e-commerce valuation happen, when they happen in respect of the deals, that is sale of those, I presume. So you rightly said that 50% deals get closed in 90 days, then 30% in maybe 120 days, and the remaining in 6 months. But those deals closed means they are successful. So my question is, successful deals on one hand and failed deals on the other hand. So yes.
These statistics are only based on the successful deals which were closed in these 3 sites: Flippa.com, digitalexits.com, and businessexits.com. Even today, if you go to these particular sites, there are very many e-commerce sites which are ready for sale. And pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. Post-COVID-19, number of e-commerce sites on sale have gone up 4 times. For your kind information, please visit these sites.
All right, great. I presume that the successful deals feel is understood. The failed figure perhaps is not so easily known or not so easily trackable. World over, we see that the overall mergers acquisition 70% fail. That's what they say. Now, we do not know in the e-commerce what is the stage, but I think something unknown thing, let us keep it aside. We move to Harshad sir. Agricultural land valuation, what methodology we should use? You need, being near Baramati, you should answer this.
Generally, this land valuations. So typically, what we have seen is that this land valuations are done based on the market approach. So what is being done is that you have to find out the nearest deal and take the market rates prevailing in the locality, and you can apply. There is one more reference with respect to the ready reckoner rates, which also could be available if there are no comparable transactions or no transactions. And based on that, you can do it, and you can do certain adjustments. So that is what the approach is being followed till now. But here the big challenge is that I have done a kind of assignment wherein, for example, there is agricultural land. So that agricultural land was having this sugarcane. Now, whether we should value that as a only as an asset, or shall we also count for that the income which is accrued over the period on account of farming this sugarcane, because you get a good amount of income. It's a cash crop, so you can generate a lot of income out of it. So there is a one more approach which has to evolve in the agriculture valuation, is to do it based on the income approach. And really speaking, that would be a really tough thing to do, but definitely that will be more giving the insights about what is the intrinsic value than the having the demand supply equations. And you have seen the drops, falls in the real estate prices. It's going up, going down. So as an intrinsic value believer, I feel that the days are not far when we'll see that the perhaps this in the land valuation they call it as a rent capitalization method, wherein they can capitalize the rent on account of your renting out. But that income approach has to come in front in days to come.
Okay, very interesting. Next question is to Chandarji. Chandar, I find one interesting trend that people are reading your books, and whatever is not understood in the book, they start asking you question by taking this opportunity. So here is the question: what is the review of business model and prospective financial information into bracket cash flows? Over to you.
Sir, considering the current business, see, when you say discounted cash flow valuation, we also call it garbage in, garbage out. I mean, if you do not validate the projections, and how do you validate the projections? By considering one, the past history of the company. Second, doing a quick ratio analysis of the company and comparing it with its comparable companies. I mean, an industry can be having a 15% operating profit, but if the subject company is showing 40% operating profit, then its valuation will go significantly higher. So, two aspects to it. One, that considering the current scenario, I mean, that any company which had done a valuation in February or maybe December 19 or January 20 would have shown certain numbers in 2021. And typically every company shows about 15-20% growth every year. But most likely the 2021 top line numbers will not get achieved, which were made prior to COVID. So there is a need to relook, because what has happened in COVID is that even if it is not a permanent event, it has deferred the projections of the company, the sustainability, the achievement of the projections of the company by about 8 months to 9 months. We are still in the middle of that COVID. We cannot be very sure of exact outcome, but yes, the projections must be reviewed, and basis doing a discounted cash flow, it is strongly recommended to also do a market multiple valuation and compare the market multiple valuation with a discounted cash flow valuation. Because when you compare a relative valuation with a DCF valuation, you come to know what is the sanity of the projections. So that is very important, sir.
Great, Chandar. Only I think a small request which is coming on WhatsApp to me from few participants is that there seems to be in Delhi a lot of pressure of COVID. So your answers are mostly related to COVID, and they are requesting कि COVID का fear निकाल के भी थोड़ा सा guide us. So every answer need not be related to COVID. Coming to Sanjay sir, indemnification of liability by valuers in case of asset valued and account turns NPA. That's a Sanjay. I think your rich experience in industry should make you easy this question. Sanjay and I were together in Reliance.
Yeah, this is my, of course, in Reliance experience, basically. Will help me how indemnification is to be signed. But I believe, strong belief that indemnification should not be more than the value of benefits what you have arrived by doing a valuation. There are companies who are talking of signing of unlimited valuation, signing of unlimited valuation, and then they will give a contract. But I believe the indemnification should be limited to the amount of value of fees, professional fees you charge to that extent. This is what my view.
Okay, I will only add, I mean, one of the recent case or two recent cases which I have read, I don't vouch for them, that one breach had fallen and one of the land and building valuer was put to a severe, I think, questions or whatever. I mean, maybe a huge liability. And then there is another case also happened recently of a famous valuer. So in that case, the liabilities can be humongous. So can you reply can you give your answer with reference to such kind of cases? Sanjay?
Actually, you need to repeat. Actually, you had to break the audio in between. Yeah, you have the audio was break in between. Can you repeat the question?
I'll repeat. I'll repeat. In between, in Mumbai itself, there were one or two cases where in one case the breach had fallen. And in another case also there was a land building valuation which was highly questioned. So therefore the liabilities which arose in case of the valuers were pretty high. So while it's easy, I mean, one can say that the liability is only to the extent of benefit, means the valuation fees. But in these cases, the valuation liability has gone quite up. So from that angle, this question is being asked.
Okay, so that is in case of land and building, and is basically a professional fees of the architect or something separately. Because the valuer will not be affected by the quality of the building. But so what I have observed in the case of building, especially, there is an all contractors risk where all such insurance are taken and the indemnification is also taken. Professional indemnity is the call of the day even for the valuers today. And I suggest that we should strongly take the professional indemnity to survive in this market where everything, if it is questioned, then you will have a lot of issues and it will not be restricted to the fees. So in my view, the indemnity in your case, what you mentioned, should be restricted only to some extent, or it should be defined previously in your contract.
All right, very clear. Now, whenever such questions are being discussed, some feedback comes from audience on my WhatsApp. So wherever the feedback is interesting, I feel like asking one question to all of you turn by turn, only to be given as a figure. If a SFA valuer is earning around 30 to 40 lakhs per annum as a valuation fee, how much, I mean, can you advise him how much should be the liability insurance he should take in value? Sanjay, you first tell the figure and others be ready with your figures. Sanjay, have you heard me?
It should be restricted to the fees only. That's why I'm very firm on that.
So 30-40 lakhs. Okay. Anand? Anand, would you like to answer? Anand is on mute. Okay, let me move to Harshad. Harshad, unmute and say.
Sir, your audio I could not hear. So can you just repeat in short?
I say that if a particular valuer is earning 30 to 40 lakhs on the valuation assignment business per annum, how much is professional liability insurance?
Generally, insurance, everybody says that one has to have at least 10 years of cover. So you have to have 10 years of, your earnings that you can capitalize, do NPV, and you can do your own valuation.
Oh, so around 3 crores you are saying in this case, if I take a 10% interest rate. Mota moti. Okay, okay. So 30 lakhs and 3 crores. Let's come to Chandar. Chandar, figure please.
Sir, first of all, your agreement should take care of all these aspects so that issue should not arise. I mean, because it will be difficult to quantify the number. It could be 1 lakh, it could be 100 crores also, sir. Indemnity is a very big aspect. So I think it should be a clear no, that no indemnity should be given. A valuer is responsible, valuer is doing under certain assumptions. Management should compensate for that. He should not go into that part.
नहीं क्या होता है चंदन, you are one of the big fours in valuation. So let's not go by your case where clients come to you. Here the mid-size valuers where they run behind clients. So let us be practical. I am talking about a poor valuer earning 30-40 lakhs, not like you. So he has to also earn his bread better. No? So please talk in the lines of common man than a big four of valuer. Yes, Chandar.
Yeah, see, everyone should have a 1 crore indemnity. That is all I can say. But I can't. I'm not sure whether it will fall enough or not.
Okay, okay. But broadly, you are saying 1 crore would be okay.
1
All
crore
right.
should be okay.
Who is left? Nikki, what do you say?
Sir, I would say कितना भी इंडेमनिटी ले लो, कितना भी प्रोफेशनल इंश्योरेंस ले लो, कुछ ज्यादा हेल्प नहीं होगा. उससे अच्छा है लेट्स बी मोर सिलेक्टिव इन टेकिंग अप द असाइनमेंट, एंड दैट शुड बी योर बेटर कवर देन टेकिंग अप द प्रोफेशनल लायबिलिटी कवर.
And we'll come to Anand. You want to say something?
Yes, sir. I would like to
Anand?
add something. Yeah. I would like to
Yes,
add
yes.
something, sir. As far as Dalta case is concerned, if we can go little insight to that particular case, valuer was very clear that why he has not selected DCF. He has given the reasoning for all the things. So I think if your report is professional and if you have drafted your report in a proper manner, the chances of liability will get reduced. And as far as the indemnity is concerned, yes, indemnity to the extent 50 lakhs to crore rupees is sufficient for a mid-size firm. Over to you, sir.
I think hearing these figures, I feel like taking the insurance agency and come to all these 139 participants. All right, we'll come to GKR, sir. I'm not asking him the liability question because he has a bigger question. What is the present position of draft valuer bill and when can it be enacted in India?
Sir, Bhaveji, you please ask that because that is not fair. You have asked this liability question to everybody. You have not asked me.
Only on liability. I thought your figure will be in 100 crores or something, considering your big business, and people will get worried. You know, that's why I was not asking.
Please ask the question. What is the question I want to hear?
The question was that the liability, I mean the SFA valuers, somebody who is earning 30 to 40 lakhs on the valuation business or profession in a year, how much professional indemnity insurance he should take. And there are figures from 30, I think somebody said 3 crores, somebody said 1 crore, somebody said 50 lakhs. So over to you.
Sir, only if I sign an indemnity guarantee, then only I should go for an indemnity insurance. Number one. Now, why this question is not asked to every other professional? Advocates are there. Why advocates are not signing indemnity? Chartered accountants, are they signing indemnity? A majority of your chartered accountants, company secretaries, are you signing indemnity? Who's that guys who are actually asking us to sign indemnity, and why valuers are coming forward to sign indemnity? That is not fair. Asking indemnity to a professional, it is unfair. That is not a question at all to be discussed among the professionals. This is my very hard hitting answer. None of us should sign an indemnity insurance. None of us should sign indemnity. That taking an indemnity insurance is a different part. Not signing an indemnity and taking an indemnity insurance. That is atrocious. atrocious. Coming to the second question of me, what is the present position of draft valuers bill? When can we expect the enactment?
I think GR sir, sorry to interrupt you. Indemnity is not signed by a particular valuer, like you rightly said, but otherwise, how much insurance he should take?
Sir, वो तो individual बात है. When I'm not signing an indemnity at all, taking an indemnity insurance is the second question that is open to me. So therefore, there is no risk at all involved. I'm only giving my my professional judgment, my professional estimate. There should not be an indemnity for it. I am an independent professional. Who's the people, first of all, who are asking indemnity? That is totally wrong. Absolutely wrong.
Yes, sir. One minute.
Don't
No, 1 minute. I know you are.
Don't interrupt me.
Go ahead.
This is the place where professional everybody have to stand united. United, we have to give only one voice. No indemnity will be signed by any valuer. And if we are not united, that is a disgrace to the profession. This is my humble opinion. Next question, please.
While your point is well accepted, no indemnity be given, and I think every valuer is hell-bent on that.
Yes.
The question is, so no indemnity is given by a particular valuer.
Exactly.
And he is earning 30 to 40 lakhs on a valuation profession per annum. How much professional liability insurance he should take?
No, that is not professional insurance. Not because I am giving an indemnity for a certificate. That is totally different. For example, what is the professional insurance is not for the certificate what I am giving. This is with respect to you have the what do you call it as the liability under the various laws. Liability under the various laws. That protection you need by taking an indemnity insurance. For example, what is the maximum liability under various acts with respect to signing a valuation? Not the indemnity should be asked by the respective party, but there is a legal indemnity it is there. So that aspect is totally different, which has to be actually protected through an insurance equivalent to the legal indemnity. So this is my humble opinion. Thank you very much.
All right, we move to the next question, which is to GKR sir only. What is the present position of draft valuer 2020 bill, and when can it be expected to be enacted in India?
Sir, till recently, even Pawan Kumar, who is the executive member of the Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India, they have made it one point very clear that even till last July 31st, that the bill is still hot. It has not been kept in cold storage. Number two, when can we expect the enactment? I am also very keen like you. When Salman Khan will marry, that is the day when valuer bill also will come into an act. That is my opinion on this. But like all of you, we are all waiting when the COVID pandemic will end. I am also very eager to see when the valuer bill will become a valuer's act.
If your answer is over, I think you should also go into politics. A very, very diplomatic answer. Let's move to Harshad sir. What to do with those who submit manipulations in the bank in the place of valuation at a peanut price?
So this question is already being answered. Those who are handling this IBC matters, for example, I am also insolvency professional. So the question comes when this account turns into MP and you are going for a valuation. And interestingly, if that same set of valuers approach you for the valuation, the next question is being asked by the bankers is that if the same thing was valued maybe 10x, how this is valued now 0.10 of x, the same set of valuers. And as you rightly said, Bhavesh, I could recollect that there are so many cases wherein the valuers are being questioned, and with this new framework, which also it's giving us, there are a lot of penalties and there are financial implications if your valuation reports can go wrong. And especially under IBC, you know, your NCLT vets your valuation report. And I could remember a judgment, a recent one, wherein the NCLT board member has asked that this valuation is not correct, and you again have to do the valuation and then come to the NCLT for further adjudication. So in this light, you know, if somebody is doing it for peanuts, you know, these peanuts are going to be very, very costly in days to come, and he will definitely is going to regret. So one thing everybody talks about is the fee structure, or you know, see, earlier days were different. Earlier there were, you know, n number of valuers, certified valuer, you know, government approved valuers, what all, what not, and everybody used to do the valuation because there were no implications, there were no responsibilities, there were nothing. Now these things are in place, so you are exposed to a risk. So himself, whomsoever is signing this kind of a things, he is himself is putting into very, very, you know, a big trap which could be open for next 7-8 years, and he would be subject to the appropriate actions if it doesn't work as what he thought.
Quite a strong answer. In fact, yesterday I was reading somewhere an American parliamentarian is saying that if you feel compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. You know, that reminds me that. Okay, we move to Chandraji. How to find out in the valuation exercise the impact of uncertainty? Tough question to tough man.
So impact of uncertainty can be done by considering different scenarios. So instead of valuing a company under the, say, a single set of numbers, you can create some scenarios. Like if, I mean, the projections which the company gives, you can presume that's a success scenario because company is always optimistic. But if that does not happen, you can discount, say, the projections by 50% and say that that's a survival, and say to 25% and that's a failure scenario. So one could be different scenarios. Second could be doing a scenario sensitivity analysis, wherein, you know, your 3-4 metrics like cost of capital, your growth rate in terminal period, the minor points which have a huge value impact, you can see that if they move up or down by, say, 1%. So if your cost of capital move up or down by 1%, your growth rate in terminal period is 4% or 3% or 5%. The valuation numbers can change. So you may be required to, and one more point is to compare, benchmark it with the relative valuation. Do benchmark with the relative valuation. It's very important.
I think very clear answer. I appreciate that. Now we move to Sanjay. How to do valuation under Companies Act when management says that they have created an ESOP pool with a board resolution, while the capital table shows currently none of the shares have been allotted. Do not appear in balance sheet. Sanjay? Sanjay has become invisible. Okay. Will Chandra, I mean, will hold that. Let Sanjay come back. I will move to GKR, sir. Whether valuation profession will have a scope for practice without IBC, particularly from the view of IBC suspension under Section 10A.
Sir, 10A and valuation should not be connected at all. 10A is only a temporary suspension, that too a 6-month suspension, which can be extended for 1 more year. That too only because of the lockdown. IBC is not shut down. Second, there has been a lot of default which happened before 25/3/2020, before 25th of March. Many cases are going to be filed in NCLT with respect to application for pronouncement of CIRP. So there is going to be a lot of work, especially for valuers. Second, there is one particular chapter, time is ticking, tick, 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 with respect to individuals and partnership firms. And already all the individuals partnership firms who have borrowed across length and breadth of the country, the numbers are more than 40 lakh borrowers. More than 40 lakh borrowers, individuals and partnership firms. Day by day, their what do you call it as, they have taken the 6-month moratorium, whether post 6 month they will either pay their liability or they will default. This will decide whether the chapter 3 of IBC will be ticked. So that is a very, very important place where the number of 3,000 valuers, what you are saying is peanuts, because the number of CIRP and liquidation cases is hardly 2,000, and 3,000 valuers are okay, and even the insolvency professionals of 3,000 is okay. But when that number ticks, the number of valuers, many people have to come inside valuation profession. So therefore 10A is nothing. It is the question itself should not be connected at all. My view is that there is no such impediment because of 10A. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Next questions to Harshad. There is a board resolution for ESOP already passed. Okay, but ESOP is not yet vested with the employees on the valuation date. So what's the treatment of this?
Sir, before that, I just wanted to add a few things about GK sir comment. I just wanted to bring to your notice that after 26th of July, you can see and check on the IBBA website. Already there are 50 matters which are being admitted because this defaults were before 25th of March. So already 50 matters has been admitted. So it has not restricted. Moreover, there are around what I understand is that there are since I'm from Mumbai, so there are 2,500 NCLT applications which are being pending, which are being filed pre-COVID. So these are applications will be heard and this would be adjudicated, and this 6 months this is just to that will allow the adjudicating authority to clear the backlog. So I don't think so there will be any impact, as GKR sir said that there will. I don't think so it will have anything to say about that. So this is what I just wanted to add to the GKR sir's comment. About this ESOP, naturally this ESOP, what I understand from the question is that this ESOPs have been, there is a resolution, but these are not being vested. So generally these ESOPs are to be valued on from the date of vesting. So because that is the date wherein there is an option which is given to the employee to exercise. So if that is not being vested right now, there will not be no financial implications. The implication will start post this vesting.
Would you say grant date or vesting date?
So there is only board resolution. These ESOPs are not yet vested.
Maybe 1 minute. After board resolution, there will be granted to individual employee, and after they complete the locking period, they get vested. So you are saying it should be on the grant date. Okay, right. So we move to now Chandra sir. I mean, it's very difficult for me to call you Sir Chandra because you are my son. So what are the key issues in income-based valuation?
Sir, income-based valuation, one is we covered upon the validation of the business plan, because essentially income-based valuation is a discounted cash flow valuation. So that validation should be done. And while validation, the company's past track record needs to be reviewed, and the comparable companies also needs to be reviewed. One important aspect is, which geography the company is operating. Because a company could be doing all the business in India, another company could be doing a business in Europe, and a third company can be doing in US. So the geographical impact are very important from a cash flow perspective. And on the other hand, the cost of capital also needs serious review, because the aggressive the cash flows, the aggressive should be the cost of capital. And as a valuer, we have with us the company specific risk premium, which can be adjusted considering the aggressiveness of the cash flows. So these are the broader aspects, but essentially, sir, it is your revenue which you need to review, your cost, your working capital, and your leverage, your debt. So these 4 aspects with ratio analysis, if you do, I think you would be able to understand whether the projections are realistic or not, and then based on that you will consider an appropriate discounting rate and do valuation.
Great. Thanks a lot. Very clear answer. Now I go to GKR sir, and before I tell him the questions, GKR sir, you had praised me for Limca record, and recently we got Asia Pacific record for the biggest webinar, where the participants were from 170 countries, 170 cities, and 15 countries. So you had been a big encouraging person for that. So we have gone. Limca was 2011. And now 2020 is Asia Pacific record. I am hoping with all your support, we'll go for Guinness also. All right.
Sir,
So,
Guinness record.
question to you.
Guinness record. Next is Guinness record.
Guinness now. 7 November, we are aiming at Guinness. And with your support and everything, I'm sure we will achieve it. So, GKR sir, the next question to you: how to value a SIG company?
Oh wow, wonderful question. SIG company only from a balance sheet we see that it is a SIG company because I am making a loss and I have an accumulated losses in my balance sheet. Second, if there is a potential for me in future, definitely I cannot project from the negative number. I cannot project it. So what I will do, I'll turn back and I will normalize the earnings, especially by looking at one business cycle. Otherwise, I will take the average. What do you call it as the normal circumstances? Normal circumstances. Generally, only in the normal circumstances, from there only you will actually take off the plane. What happened yesterday in Calicut, almost by 7:30 today, it was an abnormal scenario. So if it is a normal scenario, the plane would not have skid off. So if it is a normal scenario, automatically it will that at the experience of that particular pilot, plane cannot actually skid. So we have to actually do the valuation based on the normal circumstances, whereby I will actually eliminate those abnormal scenarios, bring the scenario to an average profit circumstances, and from there I will take off for my future income potential. So that is the one way of valuing a SIG company, provided the SIG company is surviving only because of future prospects. For example, post marriage people, all of us, we are all married people. Even though there is a difficulty, we don't see present day. We say next day, tomorrow, next year. Next another 10 years, the life is going to be better. So let us actually go with this. So same is the case with SIG company also. So thank you very much, Bhavik.
Right. I think Harshad, there is a little repetition on the question, so I'm avoiding it. Question 29 is something similar. So I'm moving to directly question 30, and which is again coming to GKR sir. How this is helpful for a person involved in IFRS implementation? The valuation course, how is it helpful to
IFRS?
People who are in IFRS implementation?
Your question is how this is helpful for a person involved in IFRS implementation. That is a
valuation profession.
Sir, this is one point. All the 14 RVOs have to be together. Second, all the 3,000 plus registered valuers have to be together. When the draft valuer bill came, there were 14 acts that was mentioned. One act was not mentioned. That was Goods and Service Tax Act. But the Goods and Service Tax was mentioned in the respective committee. The committee will be chaired by one representative from CBIC. Number 2. Number 3, every Ind AS prescription is there is a need for a recognition, measurement, remeasurement, and disclosure. The recognition and disclosure is an accounting perspective, but the measurement and the remeasurement, that to an annual exercise and a periodical exercise, is actually with the help of a valuer. Everywhere in Ind AS as well as in IFRS, the word that is prescribed is called the management's best estimate, because the accounting information is presented to the auditor only by the management. This is a place where the 14 RVOs and the 3,000 registered valuers have to be together, represent the regulator IBBI, There, IVBI is an arm of Ministry of Corporate Affairs to impress upon when they are bringing out the company's Indian Accounting Standard Rules 2015 and also an amendment here and there. They should also come out with a very, very clear-cut direction and notification that registered valuers should also be considered, first of all, as a point by the notification by MCA. Then there is a link between the corporates and the registered valuers. Till that time, registered valuers will be out of IFRS implementation and NDS. Thank you very much.
Great, sir. Next question is to Harshad sir again. In case of a negative net worth losses for last 3 years, how to determine swap ratio for mergers?
Okay. In such cases, generally, when we say about net worth, means we calculate based on the book values. So here I would like to bring to your notice that everybody has to first of all do the valuation again. So this the book balances may not reflect the reality. So first of all, we have to revisit the valuation of the assets if if we are following the asset-based approach. Still the company is not having any thing, so there could be a possibilities of synergy. There could be a very much possibilities of exploring some accumulated losses which can get tax incentives going forward. There could be a cases of there are some hidden treasures. What happens is that balance sheet may not reflect the whole story. So as a valuer, one has to really look into the aspects, why this deal or merger or acquisition is happening and what could be the possible reasons. So that can give you the hints about what could be hidden inside. So I've come across one of the valuation wherein we find out that this particular company was actually having nothing, but what it was being bidded for was that they were having a registration with a defense one defense authority, and which was issuing a tender. So naturally, if that registration or that vendor code, in that cases it can have the value. So we have to find out, and if there is nothing, then obviously if there is nothing or you cannot find anything which to which you can allocate the value, you can obviously take it at zero.
All right, I think we have time there, so I'll request Nikki to show her PowerPoint. I was not sure whether we'll get the time or not, but Nikki, over to you to show the PPT and explain the question.
I have one question to Mr. Harshad. Can I ask?
Yeah, sure. I think, Nikki, let's give 1 minute to Sanjay.
Yeah, Harshad, one question is that in the case of a merger ratio where there is a total negative value and there is a negative worth, so is it possible that they can issue shares at the face value because you cannot issue at a discount in case of a merger ratio, whatever the ratio comes?
In that cases, in some of the cases, you can end up saying that the ratio is 1:0. So we will not allocate anything to the entity which is getting merged. So that is possible. There need not to be, face value has got no relation with the value which is being allocated.
Okay, no, my question is when you allot shares, in case of both the loss company, the company who is acquiring is also loss-making company, and the company being acquired is also a loss company, and there is a substantial loss, and there is a negative value, and you cannot arrive at a value of per share of either company. Then in that case, how you allot the shares? Sorry, we can talk later on. We continue with the Pravina right now.
All right, let's move to Nikki. Yeah, Nikki.
Just a second, I will just join.
Sure.
So what we wanted to do today was, since we've already discussed a lot on the question that you had asked me, it was on impact of COVID-19 on valuation. Since it is an important topic, what we understand is it is not only about the impact, but also all the care that we need to take while doing any kind of valuation during this time. So what I can say is right from March till current date and maybe for the further few more months, what are the cautions that we need to take to ensure that our valuations are under less questionable? So shall we go ahead? Am I audible properly?
Yes.
Okay. So what I've done is very quickly we'll just run through a few of the areas where valuation has an impact and the few things which we need to consider. First is, as Chandra had rightly mentioned, that Sensex had fallen more than 40% over the period from March. So definitely where this would impact is the volatility. So different sectors have got different volatility, and hence whenever we are doing the volatility calculation, it will not be as simple as just considering the comparable companies' volatility of the previous period and taking it into account. But we need to understand the viability of the volatility which and the period in which we are going to be taking this. So one factor will be volatility. Second is why this is going to be impacted is definitely because there is a lot of change in the actual and the expected revenue earnings that has happened because of COVID. A lot of increase in the debt and the interest portion, and also a lot of changes in the assets, real estate. If we go out today and we see there is a lot of change in the real estate valuation also, because of these factors, there can be a lot of change in the company's valuation. If we look up, I see approach wise, what could be the changes? One, if we look at the cash flow income approach, for ensuring that our cash flow projections are well in place, what we should do is have a reforecasting and modeling of the cash flows. Further, we can, for further certainty, what we can also do is have a sensitivity and a scenario analysis so that our cash flows are in a better position. Assess with the client as to what kind of recovery they are expecting. And definitely one thing needs to be done is whatever may be the 2020 revenues, that need not be matching with the historical trend. One. Secondly, as far as the cost of capital is concerned, till now we used to only add to the risk premium to the risk-free rate, but definitely now we need to give some consideration to the COVID and some kind of a risk premium to it as well. So what I mean is we might consider increasing the cost of capital. Further, there are a few aspects which recently when we were doing the valuation in this current period, these are the few aspects which we need to understand, because there are a lot of companies to whom the revenues have been affected, not for the temporary period but for a permanent period, because there is a change in the consumer behavior. So there can be a long-term impact on the revenues of the company. There can be an impact on the increase in the cost of production. There can be a delay in receiving of the funds. Hence, there can be an increase in the working capital days. So all of this needs to be assessed and understood whether it is a short-term period or it is something which is going to be for a longer-term period. One adjustment which the panelists already have discussed across, and I'll not go deeper in this, is the adjustment to the discount for lack of marketability. DLOM is what we generally call it. So we may also consider giving the DLOM factor to the valuation to ensure that a proper weightage is given to the current scenario. Second, when we are using the market approach while we are valuing, as everybody just rightly mentioned, that considering the PE or the EBITDA multiple and just applying to it may not be a correct picture at this time. But what I believe is whatever we are using, whether it is an unaffected value parameter or it is a parameter which we are using post the March, what we still need to do and ensure is that we have a proper documentation and disclosure of the entire calculation in our valuation report. As I had mentioned earlier when Bhavesh sir mentioned to us is that how much indemnity we'll take, how much insurance, I would believe proper disclosure in our report of what basis have we taken and what working and the sources we are using can act as one of the covers for us. And hence I believe we should give a proper disclosure as to what multiple we are using and what is the basis why we are using that calculation. This is one thing which I believe can also help us during this juncture, is instead, if it is permissible in the report for which we are using it, we can provide a range of valuation instead of just fixing it to one number, so that we are ensuring a kind of a leeway for us for a range in between the valuation need to be considered. Obviously, this can go in with a proper disclosure in place. This was a small disclosure note which we have started putting it across in our valuation reports to ensure safety and security while we are doing our valuations, just to make it a point that what has been considered and what are the areas which have not been considered. If Bhavesh sir permits, we can share this clause with the group for the benefit of all the valuers. That's
Certainly,
it. Thank you
certainly.
so much. Thank you so much.
Vicky, one question arises. When you
Yeah.
give a range in the valuation, how much should be the variation? 10%, 20%, 100%? I mean, the range minimum and maximum. What is the broad feel? 20% is okay, or I can have the valuation say 10 crore or 100, up to 100 crore. Then I make the whole exercise meaningless.
Yes, absolutely true. See, there is no standard benchmark as to what should be the range that should be given. But yes, definitely it cannot be 100%. But what is also important is to consider that range is coming out of different methods that we are using, and it has to be in sync with each other. This is a general answer. To be more specific, I believe 20-25% difference of ranges should be the maximum that should be given.
Okay, 20-25%. How much would you say, Chandra? Is 20-25% digestible by you or something else? Just a
Yeah,
figure.
looks reasonable.
Just a figure.
Looks
Huh?
reasonable.
Okay, Arshad?
Sir, we can give the range, but the problem is that the user of the valuer report, he will not accept it. So he always says that whatever you feel that you do, and as a valuer, I feel that if you give a range, you are trying to add to his confusion, and especially in IBC, what what is the range that is being accepted is around 5 to 10%, not more than that.
In fact, in one case, I was told that when the range is to be given, they say that for inventory ka valuation for bank purpose, give the higher one, and for the tax purpose, give the lower one. So, that range also can be misused. Anyway, I would move to the next question. And Harshad, I think the question was asked in a different way, but I would, take a substance out of it. Is it compulsory to have the valuation by all the three methods: market, income, and asset?
Not compulsory. It is optional. You have to, as a valuer, you have to use your professional judgment that which is the appropriate method. And if you feel that one method is appropriate, you can conclude with only one method. You need not go to any of the other methods. But as a valuer, you feel that the combination is required. You can do either a combination, or you can derive it by two different methods, rather two and more. So that is all up to the professional judgment of valuer. So that is why it's very important to have a valuer who has got relevant experience and who has got the feel of the values what within which it can frame.
Anybody would have something more to say on this? Yes, Chandra.
Understanding the regulatory guidance on this is very important. Just to give an example, if you are doing a swap ratio of a listed company, then SEBI has prescribed a format wherein you have to mandatorily give the valuation under asset, income, and market approach, and you have to give reasons for acceptance or not selection or not selection of a particular approach. So regulations play a very important role. And just linking it with the earlier question, when it comes to a regulatory valuation, your point of valuation will go. If it is a management purpose valuation, then your range will go.
Sorry, management purpose, what did you say?
So if management wants to understand what its business is worth, it is not for any particular regulation, then you can give a range. If there is an M&A valuation, there is a, there could be different probabilities attached. But when it comes to regulation, like Companies Act asks you a minimum price. Income tax asks you a minimum and maximum price. So you can't give a range in a minimum or maximum price. You need to give a particular dot price.
That is understood. But you are also saying that using all three methods is not compulsory, unless required by some regulation. Is that right, Chandra?
Sir, the value.
My voice.
Yeah. So you need to look into the value. Yeah. So it is not mandatory, but you need to look at specific regulations. Like when it comes to specific SEBI regulations, it is mandatory.
Any other regulation where it is mandatory, all methods?
No, sir, I'm not coming.
All methods are not mandatory in any other regulations.
Okay. In fact, anybody, Nikki or Sanjay or Anand, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing that usually what happens is that whenever it is a statutory valuation, you will require one value. But whenever it is a commercial value, when people want to buy or sell their company, that is where they want a range. That is there then want to know as to what is the range within which I can go ahead and do the negotiation. So depending upon for what purpose you have been appointed, range can also be important and a particular number can also be important.
All right. Back to Harshad sir again. Particularly inventory valuation is a big debate. Who should value inventory? For example, spares to plant and machinery.
This is a big debate. This inventory valuation, whether it's who's the authority. One thing is for sure is that land and building valuer cannot do this valuation. So it is the only call to be taken based on whether it's a SFA valuer or a plant and machinery value. One school of thought says that this inventory consists of the physical things. So naturally, as a physical or tangible assets, the plant and machinery guy should have a preference. The other school of thought says that it's a current asset, so naturally SFA are the person who are the right to do the valuation. I would like to bring to notice that my thoughts are very clear on this, that inventory valuation consists of two parts. So there is a asset, there is a items in the inventory, and there are two parameters. One is the quantity and one is the value. Now, if you give the, for example, the inventory valuation also will have the valuation of the finished goods, or also it will have the valuation of the WIP, work in progress. So in that case, how a plant and machinery guy would be equipped to do a valuation of WIP, which consists of the allocation of the overheads, the manpower cost, labor cost. So that really is a question. So generally, my experience was that this inventory valuations are being done by the SFA values only. So the point is that instead of focusing more on the technical aspects, it's more important to focus on the how you do the valuation, which is the forte of a financial accountant or this securities or financial assets valuer. That is what my views are on this.
If GKR sir is there, would you like to add something? Gopal Krishnji, are you there?
No, he has left, sir.
He has left. Okay. Sanjay ji, would you like to add something on this? Or it's still
I agree with what Harshad said on the inventory valuation, and I think it should be within the scope of the SFA only, because it's part of the current assets.
All six people are SFA, so I don't think we will have a disagreement on this. So we will take it in the common forum. When there will be next time values of land and building and plant and machinery also, then really the discussion will be interesting. We all six of us here being SFA valuers, I am sure we will agree that inventory should be by SFA valuers. Okay. Chandra, you want to add any regulation about the inventory valuation? IBS, what does it say, or what is there internationally? The inventory valuation, so far to my knowledge also and everybody's knowledge, there is no regulation who should do it. So generally, do you have any international practices where who does it, in which case like that?
Sir, no specific international practice, but inventory can have, and like inventory can be investments, and inventory can be technical in nature. So wherever there is the role of a technical nature, I think it should be done in consensus with a plant and machinery valuer. So it is not right to say that inventory should only be done by a SFA valuer. SFA valuer should do if the inventory is more of financial assets, but mostly when we see manufacturing companies, the inventory is not financial, wherein you need to rely on work of an expert. So maybe you can get a stock audit report of some earlier valuer on some technical statements, but maybe SFA person would need assistance of other valuer as well.
I think the best solution could be just a thought that the RV regulations should make it compulsory that it is a joint valuation by two valuers, technical and commercial both. Then I think all will agree and IBBI will have this thing.
Sir, this I just wanted to add to this that it is not limited to inventory. There are certain set of assets. Till date, it's not clear that who should value it. For example, software. Suppose there is a software like CATIA. There is a SAP license. Now, who is the right person? So there are certain assets which is a big question mark. I have come across one case wherein there was a it was a in the books it was shown as a plant and this land and bidding, and when we actually got into that and we engaged the land and bidding valuer, he said that there is no land and bidding but there are tenancy rights. Now the question is that these tenancy rights, whether it's a forte of the land and bidding valuer or it comes under SFA. So that likewise there are certain common points wherein there could be a clash of interest, which actually IBBI should do it. I have written extensive email to IBBI, but I am waiting for the reply for a long time.
But just to clarify, sir, just to clarify, regulation rule 8.2 of registered valuer rules give an option to the valuer to take assistance of an expert, wherein he feels that the valuation requires the help of the other valuer. So the IBBI rules already permit it, sir.
So in a way, either of them can do it. Is that?
So rule 8.2 permits. I mean, if you are valuing. Harshad, let me see. If you are, my point is that if a valuer is doing some valuation and he thinks that he needs assistance of another valuer or for an expert, rule 8.2 of RV rules permit that.
I understand. But what we are discussing
ultimately, who should be the signing authority?
So the point which you are saying, in which let us say SFA does it with the expert help of engineer, or a plant and machinery does it with the help of a chartered or cost accountant.
So my view is SFA, stock by default should come under SFA category, but he should do it in consensus with the help of an expert.
So do you think at a later date IBBI will finally come with a clarification, or it is likely to be in limbo for long?
IBBI will not come with clarification on these topics, sir.
Okay.
These professionals have to
so I
understand.
Think, an excellent discussion, and thanks to all the faculties. In fact, I would like to tell all the faculty that some of the issues discussed today, I am in the process of writing some, you can say, not exactly a book, but maybe you can call it a book also. So, and this is going to be joined the book by few people, few valuers. So all 6 of you and even any of the audience, they are welcome to join to the contribution of the book as a co-author. So obviously it is going to be a co-authorship, and you are welcome to have Harshad, Chandar, Nikki, Sanjay, Anand, and of course GK also I will convey separately, and any of the people I can see here, Geeta also. And thank you for all of you joining, and I am happy to see that our number had crossed 139, and amazing response. Thanks to all the panel for sparing the valuable time, and in case of valuers, it is a really valuable time because the assignments make a lot of inputs, and it's a hot case. So thank you to everybody, and the next webinar is on 15th August again on another discussion with another flurry of questions already left. Some of those going to be covered are cross-border transactions, international valuation scope by Indian people, and there are again heavyweights coming in. So I have the privilege of being with heavyweights. Thank you, Arshad. Thank you, Chandar. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Anand. And thank
I
you,
would
Divya.
like to
And thank you.
thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Anything honestly
Thank you.
speaking. And beyond all, thank you to audience, because believe me, vakta dasha sahasreshu sprota tatra durdaba. So if the audience is not there, all our knowledge and all great oratory has no value. So thank you to audience especially for giving a big registration and very strong attendance. I think this is a